All right, American Cultures 2, good morning, even though it's the evening here. I'm going to be posting this tomorrow morning, which will be Friday morning for you guys. It's going to be the third and next to last section of the PowerPoint notes. This is the one that focuses on the protests, all right? So how were these civil rights groups protesting for their equal rights? How are they doing all those sorts of things? Well, we're going to take a look at that now. So if you guys want to open up your PowerPoints and open to the slide, I'm sorry, where it says sit-ins. All right. Now, I'm going to post a video on this, a YouTube video from a movie called The Butler, which really shows this well as to what happened. But what a sit-in was one of the more popular forms of protest for the civil rights workers. And what it was is it later became organized by the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Committee, which, as you guys should now know, was headed by Martin Luther King. But here's what the protest was. A lot of diners and restaurants would not serve African Americans. All right, so what they would do is they would go in and they would simply sit at the tables and sit at the counter, asking to be served. And usually the waiter, waitress, or whoever would not serve them and say, you know, it's against our policy, we're not serving you. And they would sit there, they wouldn't fight back, they wouldn't argue, but they would just say, you know, we would like to be served. And they wouldn't get up. They would wait until either they were served or they were forcibly removed from these restaurants, which that happened too, as you're going to see in the video that I'm going to post for you. But that was the idea. And, you know, a lot of the restaurant and diner owners would refuse to serve them. Well, here's the problem with that. If it ends up being filled with sit-in protesters from the SCLC, you got two choices to make here, unless you want to physically remove them, which did happen. Number one, you could stick to your guns and not serve them, but guess what? They're taking up a lot of seats, so you're going to be losing some money if you do that. Number two, you could just buck the trend and serve them, but that didn't really happen, especially early on. But as you can see in the slide, it was a form of protest in which protesters would seat themselves and refuse to move, which is what I just broke down for you guys. Now, this started back during World War II in a place in Chicago known as the Jack Sprat Coffee House. That's where the first sit-in happened, and that sit-in was organized by CORE. The same exact thing. And the idea for back then, it was basically you know, we're equal enough to fight in the war, because this is 1943, World War II is going on. So we're equal enough to fight in the war, but we're not equal enough to have coffee here. And they did the sit-in. And this became a very popular form of protest in the 1960s, as I said. Often worked because business owners had to decide, are they going to serve them or are they going to lose money? SCLC became involved. By 1960, 70,000 students were involved. Many of them were arrested. Many were beaten as well, as you're going to see. And it was one of the more popular forms of protest. If you YouTube sit-in, or civil rights sit-in, you're going to see dozens and dozens of videos, whether it's documentaries or interviews with people that did sit-ins, all those sorts of things. So, and I'm going to post some videos for you guys to watch over the weekend. Next is the Freedom Rides. Now, I want you to think about this. When I break down the Freedom Rides to you guys, and remember, the question I asked you a couple days ago was, how far would you go if you felt you were being mistreated? How far would you go for equal rights? Well, ask yourself this as I go over these next few slides. Would you be willing to do this? Now, think about it honestly, because the right answer is, oh, yeah, absolutely. I would do that for equality. But when you look at what they went through, is this something you would do? All right. So Freedom Ride started in 1961. It was an event organized by CORE and the SNCC in which interracial groups of civil rights activists tested Southern states' compliances to the Supreme Court ban on segregation on interstate buses. Break it down for you. In the South, they didn't care about what laws were passed. They didn't want blacks and whites on the same buses together. Okay. And there was rumors of that up north, that was going on. So what happened was these buses got together, or these groups got together, I'm sorry, And they said, well, we're going to ride down south in these buses and see if they're really following these orders. And they were warned ahead of time. They're like, listen, when you guys get down there, there's going to be violence on you guys. They're going to retaliate in many ways. And these kids went anyway. And the idea was you would have an equal number of black and white people on the bus. So for this first bus, which we're going to talk about, if there was 13 white riders, there was going to be 13 black riders. All right, it was going to be a complete equal number of black and white riders. Now, the slide where it says violence against the riders, that started the first Freedom Ride departed from Washington, D.C. on May 4th, 1961. And every year they commemorate that too, which May 4th is coming up. It's Monday. I don't know if they're going to commemorate it now with the whole pandemic thing going on, but normally they do. But anyway, on that ride, May 4th, 1961, 13 black and white riders boarded a bus heading south. For the test, you need to know the town that they arrived in, and that town is Anniston, Alabama. Easy way for you guys to remember it. Jennifer Aniston, Alabama. All right? Someone asked me last year, was the town named after her? Well, the town was named Anniston in like the 1800s. So, no, it was not named after Jennifer Aniston. But I like your thinking. So either way, bus arrives at Anniston, Alabama, and that bus is greeted by a mob. And what this mob does is it slashes the tires on the bus, and it throws fire bombs under the bus, or into the bus. And now the bus is catching fire, right? It's filling with smoke, filling with fire, so you don't have a choice but to get out of the bus. But if you're one of these riders, you don't want to get out of the bus. Why? Because you know you're probably going to get the crap beat out of you by these riders. And they're looking around, they're screaming for help, they're screaming for the police. And the saddest part of all of this is when they looked outside, they saw that some of the people standing there were the police. So they knew they weren't going to get any help. And they also knew that if we stay on this bus, we're going to die. So they exit the bus, and on the next slide, the yellow slide, they escaped the bus, and many of the riders were beaten after escaping. And they were arrested, eventually released, and they were told, go back up north, don't ever come down here again. Now, like I said, they were beaten, the tires were slashed, fire bombs thrown through the windows of the buses. And when they got home, they recuperated, and they went back down again. Now think about that. They escaped within an inch of their lives in Anniston. And then they came back home up north, and then they did it again to promote desegregation and to get the America's attention on what's going on. Now, like I said, would you be able to do that? I know I would like to think that I would be able to do it, but I don't know. The amount of courage that that takes is just incredible. All right, red slide where it says national reaction. So there was another one in Mississippi. The Freedom Riders were immediately arrested there as well. Robert F. Kennedy, who was John F. Kennedy's Secretary of State at the time, he said essentially, he was the Attorney General, not the Secretary of State. Robert F. Kennedy was JFK's Attorney General. I don't want to get anything wrong here for you guys. But he was horrified by what he saw in the South with these freedom rides. So he issues a ruling prohibiting segregation on any form of transportation. So now you may say, well, what difference does that make? They already were against the law. Well, now if you do those certain things or not allow desegregation on buses in the South, now that's a federal crime. And, that's really not what you want to be doing. All right. These last two slides, I'm going to have a video for you guys on Monday, and there's going to be some questions with that video. And that solely pertains to what is known as the clash in Birmingham. At the time, Birmingham, Alabama was called the most segregated city in America. No city was more segregated than Birmingham. Now, and it had a large African-American community as well as a large white community. So what was going on is, black people were not allowed to shop in white stores. So Martin Luther King plans a boycott of all the stores in downtown, because there were some areas that blacks were allowed to go to, but it had to be separate and all that good stuff. So he says, well, we're going to boycott it and we're going to march. And he does. And he plans the boycotts at downtown stores to promote desegregation in the city. It started as nonviolent. And King's people were always nonviolent. They never retaliated with violence. But Martin Luther King ends up getting arrested for what is known as civil disobedience. All right? And he's arrested with a whole bunch of other protesters. Finally, a week later, they go to release him. And they say, "Hey, are you going to stop this? Are you going to go home?" And he's like, "Yeah, I am. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do it again." And of course, if you know anything about Martin Luther King and his tactics, as soon as he got released, what did he do? He and his followers began marching again. Well, this brings us to the guy that was in charge of the Safety Commission of Birmingham, Alabama. His name was Bull Connor. Okay, his real name was Eugene, but he went by Bull. He was a former baseball announcer, actually. And then he became horrible Safety Commissioner of Birmingham, Alabama, and here's why. He vowed to keep segregation at all costs. He says if he has to die keeping blacks and whites separate, then that's what he's going to do. He'll die doing it. So when he sees these protesters, now I want you to keep in mind, a lot of the protesters were children, younger than you guys, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And we talked earlier in the year in different chapters, why would you have kids that young? Well, you guys know the answer, to get sympathy, right? So when they're marching again, after King is released from jail, 900 of the marchers get arrested. That's bad enough, right? But what Bull Connor does is he orders the police to turn on high-powered hoses on the protesters, including the children, as well as attack dogs. Now, you may say, well, if you're getting hit with a high-powered hose, what's the big deal? I mean, it's just water, right? These hoses, and if you know anything, if you've ever washed a car with a hose at a drive-through car wash, if that water hits your skin, it can rip your skin right off. It feels like a knife or a blade hitting you. It's not just like, oh, I'm getting sprayed with water. And the dogs were violent attack dogs. They would attack these protesters. So he does it, and then what he does is he thinks he's doing something smart. He brings in the news, and he wants the news to film this. And his thinking is, man, when the rest of the nation sees how I'm handling this, they're going to pull back on this whole desegregation civil rights thing. They're going to say, man, that Bull Connor, he got it done. So what happens is the news shows up, and they're filming this. They're filming the protesters getting sprayed with hoses. They're filming the attack dogs biting them, including children. And the American people watching this had the complete opposite reaction that he thought was going to happen. They were outraged by what they saw. And here's what happens. You got to remember, in the 1960s, you had a group of people that were fighting for equal rights and civil rights and desegregation at all costs, right? And you also had a big group of people that were fighting to keep blacks and whites separate at all costs, right? The majority of Americans may have been kind of in the middle. And what I mean by that is they weren't sure, because this is something new to them. They felt that, it wasn't fair that all this segregation was going on and black people were treated as second-class citizens. But they also didn't know, are we ready for full equality, right? Well, what do you think happened when the news was filming these children being hit by hoses, bitten by dogs, and beaten by police officers? Well, what you just did is you took the people that were kind of on the fence about the whole thing, and then they're watching this on TV and they say, look at what these people are going through just for equality. They're being beaten, they're being bit, they're being hit by these hoses, almost tortured. And what happened is, where Bull thought the American people were going to watch this on TV and go, yeah, go get them, this is the way it's going to be, it had the exact opposite effect. And these people that were kind of in the middle on the whole idea of civil rights now started siding with the activists. And now says, you know what, maybe they do deserve equality. Maybe they do deserve to be as equal as I am. Look what they're going through just to be able to eat at the same diner as I am, just to be able to vote in the same election as I am, sit in the same movie theater, use the same restroom, water fountain, whatever it may be. So it had the complete opposite effect as to what he wanted. And the protesters end up winning. desegregation is ruled throughout the entire city limits, and fair hiring practices are made, and all these things. And in a weird way, the main person you can thank for that is Bull Connor, right? Because he thought what he was doing was making sure this stuff would never happen, and all it really did at the end of the day was help make sure it happened, okay? All right, so make sure you check over these notes really well. I'm going to post a video for you guys to watch, and then on Monday I'm going to have another video for you, and it's about Bull Connor, and it's about what happened in Birmingham, and there will be some questions for you guys to answer with that. All right, have a great weekend. Hopefully, if you guys can make it out or see the parade that the seniors are going to be doing Friday night, you guys can check that out. I think it's going to be a special thing. And have a great weekend. Talk to you guys Monday. See you.